thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to the session today, and just like to sort of acknowledge a few of our team that we've got in the audience here. So specifically UWA team, we've got Emily, Jessie, Liena, Bonnie hiding up the back there as well, and obviously the partnership with John's going to present on the water evaluation platform, and also a number of the key collaborators with the Grower Group Alliance. Daniel, who's been a key manager of the project and running things, and Ricky, Joe, and Tanya, and others. So the WaterSmart Dams project, just click, came about, as Richard sort of acknowledged, through this process as the Future Drought Fund emerged. And it was a really, I guess, kind of timely opportunity. And so the project received this funding through the Future Drought Fund from the federal government through DOR at the time, and then also through the state government's Climate Resilience Fund. And that enabled us to build a substantial sort of amount of resourcing base to, do the R&D work. But I think one of the key things, and we'll sort of go through that with the project, has been the partnership with growers and this sort of grower-led on-farm experimentation model at scale of adoption. So key sort of partnership here was the project sort of led through the Grower Group Alliance, the UWA, the partnership with DPIRD, which has been really fundamental, as well as the 4 key grower groups, and that's Compass Ag Alliance, based out of the Darkan area, MadFig in the greater Merredin areas, Southern Dirt around Kojonup, and Fitzgerald Biosphere based around the sort of Jacob area. So the context here is really the legacy of water infrastructure that we've got, and that's where a lot of the work that we wanted to do in this project came from. So I guess the sense was, remember distinctly sitting down at when South Perth was still operating at DPIRD, and there was this funny obscure virus thing that was apparently coming out of China at the time in early 2020. We were talking about what this response looked like to these challenging seasons that we'd had year on year. And looking at those different components of the puzzle, and that's really what drove the thinking around WaterSmart Dams. And that's really that we've got this legacy work stuff that Nick Wright from Richard's team at DPIRD led in using satellite and AI methods to understand the quantity of water infrastructure that we've got. So we've got 200,000 farm dams within southwestern WA, and if you look at them as a singular investment, they're probably the largest single financial investment in water infrastructure within the southwest. They, I don't know, Anthony can maybe correct me on investment of the water corporations, all of their assets, but as a rough back of the envelope, if you had to build 200,000 farm dams at $30,000 to $50,000 each, you would probably come close to eclipsing maybe the investment of water infrastructure. So farm dams are a critical part of the puzzle. And really the sense is that we didn't keep up our R&D knowledge in the water space with where we kept up with the investments in farming systems. So if I look, for example, at the last year, I think that's a really great case in point of the sort of challenges that we're needing to deal with. We had really quite modest rainfalls, but we had one of, a near record grain harvest. And so we've become a lot better at moving and evolving our farming systems to become much more adept at farming with less water and adapting to seasonal changes, and doing this in a really smart and intelligent way. And this is what's kept our growers at the forefront and allowed them to be competitive and stay, in the place that they need to be. But the sense was that a lot of the water infrastructure had been left behind. So what can we do for these things? We've got a shift also to much more intensive cropping operations. Cropping operations, by definition, require large amounts of water at the end of the dry season. And so we have these challenges of, increasing variability, of rainfall, the availability of water at this time of the year becomes a really critical problem. And on top of that, the fundamental, mechanism or way that modern cropping systems work is through, largely through effective weed control. And so water in that piece of the puzzle is a really critical part. Premium sheep production really requires a high quality and reliable water. There's a limited ability to get your way out of a water deficiency problem where you've got a large flock of sheep by relying on piped or residential, piped water. And we certainly don't want to be, largely trying to, get out of those challenges using potable water resources for on-farm water needs. And so really this focus, was on looking at on-farm and off-grid non-potable water resilience. The project itself tried to use this grower-led model and really focused on different sort of approach to doing the R&D work. So some of the earlier R&D work that certainly I was involved with and that we've seen elsewhere is typically, these little plot trials, or we get a nice little rainfall simulator, and then we try to convince people to spend, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on water infrastructure. And so really, this is, really evolving the way that we're doing R&D work, and we're not doing it in the laboratory and we're not doing it in really controlled conditions, but we're doing it at scale of adoption, at scale of, farm adoption, and with farmer grower representatives who are going to host sites and have done through the process and then have been able to, talk about their experiences. And certainly I've really enjoyed a lot of the field days where I don't have to do a lot of the talking, and it's much more interesting listening to, the family that's hosted the trial and their experiences, and we can back that up with some of the R&D and the science numbers. So we looked at 12 sites to showcase different examples, and that was focusing really on the surface water and enhancing runoff, looking at some mechanisms of evaporation reduction, and then also looking at the economics components and building this into what's now become the water evaluation platform, and developing these new fit-for-purpose tools which allow people to look at options. We're not trying to prescribe a singular solution. The things that we have to offer sit as a piece of multiple options that go with desal, that go with the sorts of approaches that are going to be covered later in the session. So there was a bit of thinking here in terms of where we targeted the sites, and that was to stratify a little bit by geography in terms of things like areas that had had drought declarations in the past and, really suffer, more common to find them under water shortages. We wanted to look at sites that were maybe a little bit more livestock and sheep intensive, ones that were much more cropping intensive, and really try and get a little bit of a stratified example of sites, acknowledging that there's big chunks of West Australian geography that we have missed, but that was the thinking behind what we've done here. We've then got a series of these fantastic people that have generously agreed to work with us on some of these trials in hosting these demonstration sites that were developed through the project. In terms of sort of moving to the first piece of the puzzle, we really talk about the project as thinking about methods to run more water into catchments to make them reliable, methods to keep the water there, and then methods that really look at the economics and evaluation, and also talking about fit for purpose water. So there had been some ideas and discussion that we'd come across of this idea of using these repurposed grain tarpaulins as catchments. We hadn't really seen examples of these tangibly being built. So this was a really great example, and this was supported by the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation team. Got a couple of the key people here in the audience who have been really fantastic in this specific site and this program, and their support for what's been done, and they're another key part of the puzzle about this multi-agency response. So this is the site down at Jerramungup, and the idea here was to build things at scale of demonstration. This was a existing community emergency water supply. It used to have a roaded catchment that ran much further up the hill. In this case, it was a real pain in the bum for the particular farmer to access this area. So this had some advantages in allowing us to build a catchment that met the requirements in terms of sizing the catchment and the dam to meet an optimal sort of setup. It reduced the amount of cropping area that was taken up. It allowed much more easy access for the farming there. And then, the key thing with all of these sites was putting, science grade instrumentation within them to collect the data that we needed to do the R&D work. So this has been really valuable in terms of a couple of key findings from this. So there's this particular site at Jacob. There's another one that John Simons, hiding somewhere in the room, I think over that way, has supported, and through the Sepwa group in Esperance, and again Department of Water in another trial site. And we've also got really interesting, really great anecdotal evidence. John and Bonnie and I were at the Sepwa Field Day about a month or so ago, and talking to a number of growers. So we're actually seeing this evidence of the tarpaulins being used. The particular contractor that does the stitching for the main grain handler with these tarps is kind of talking about the number of catchments. I think anecdotally 8 or 10, maybe 12 that have gone in around the region. So it's really encouraging to actually see that this idea of building things at scale and developing them is actually seeing translation into on-farm adoption. And so that's, I think, a really powerful validation of this sort of model of doing science. It's certainly a lot more expensive way of doing R&D work, but I think it's a lot more compelling, and we've got some really good evidence to show that, building things at scale of adoption actually leads to uptake. Jesse from our team has led a lot of the R&D number crunching on this. The sites run, on very, very small thresholds of rainfall. And what's been critical and really great from Jesse's insight in the analysis is this additional rainfall. So a lot of this rainfall that we get within Southwest and Western Australia, and particularly the nature of where our rainfall patterns are shifting, is huge quantities of rainfall fall in this range between about 0.8 of a mil where this starts to run off, and the 8, 10, 12 millimetres where a conventional roaded catchment sits. So we capture somewhere in the order of an additional 47% of the total rainfall that falls within this modest rainfall band. And so this is a key sort of finding that we've had out of the project, and where we think some of these high performance catchments really play an important role. They obviously run really fresh water off them, and we've seen other examples where people, say for example, don't necessarily combine them with a conventional dam, but with line dams, and then pushing that out into tanks and trying to retain that as really high quality spray water. So the high performance catchment type work that we've been able to do, I think, has really demonstrated some of the important role of these sorts of sites, and again is really reinforcing where we need to push a lot of our work. So when we've run the numbers on water security in the past, one of the critical gaps that we know is that out there in the wheat belt, when you do an analysis, pretty much most catchments are completely inappropriate for the size of dam. So one of the key problems that we fundamentally have is that catchments are not adequate, and this transition to no-till farming, we've become exceptionally good at keeping water in the soil profile and converting that scarce amount of water into plant growth. And by definition, that means that the water isn't there to then run off into catchments. And so the nature of our farming systems are penalising our water resources, and so we've got to adapt and change our water resources. Oops, could have played that earlier. Hopefully no one needs to go to the loo after listening to that. The other side here, this is one out near Merredin, was looking at these retrofitted roaded catchments. So going back, in this case, enlarging an existing dam, utilising an area of kind of low productivity sort of salt scald, and putting in that roaded catchment there. One of the key, I guess, understandings of this, we sort of more, I guess, came into this site as it had already been built, and then did some of the instrumentation and work. There's still a need to, one of the gaps, and Richard sort of alluded to this, DPIRD was very active in the process. So when I was working for the department some time ago, there were people within the department who were delivering training to contractors. They were delivering, information on, how to build these systems. And there's been a change. So this particular site, was, influenced by that particular contractor around over-steepening some of the banks. The particular material that site's been put into is maybe not particularly optimal. So there's also some examples here where things are maybe not quite as optimal, and I think we need to be pretty open and honest about that. But for us, that's been a real key question to say that, there is a lot of legacy information out there, but it's maybe not translated into industry. And we need to be really active in making sure that information is out there. This particular site, it's been also very interesting to actually look at the dynamics here. And one of the key things there is the ability of this site to maintain its water security through the sort of years that we've monitored it. The last couple of years we've monitored has really relied on summer thunderstorms. Now that is a pretty unreliable way of relying on your water resource, but it is an important opportunistic, way to harvest water. And so that's been a sort of key sort of finding of that one. The other one we wanted to do some R&D work was really driven again by grower interest and this kind of bottom-up model of listening to the growers and where they wanted to steer things. And so there was a lot of focus, particularly in and around this sort of Kojonup area. This is a site that was hosted by Southern Dirt, this one down in Darkan. We've got a third site out near Scotts Brook, sort of back end of Boyup Brookway. Was looking at subsurface drainage. So subsurface drainage by definition is dealing with a waterlogging problem, which is a water excess problem. And you'll notice here our suggestion is not a drought-proofing option. So if you've got a drought year, you don't really have a lot of waterlogging problems. But much in the way that we've changed and evolved our thinking about what we do with wastewater in an urban environment, we don't turf that out to the ocean as much. We try to capture that and infiltrate it and recharge it. In the same way, an agricultural waste product of waterlogging water and getting rid of it is actually a potential resource. And so that was the thinking here. These monitoring of drains and with also salinity monitoring within them, some of these drains run water that's actually fresher than my tap water or our tap water here in Perth. So really high quality water, really quite fresh, low turbidity. So particularly as a spray water resource, there's huge value that comes from these sites. They're quite variable in terms of their yield. We've seen some figures in the order of 1 to 2.5 megalitres of water. So some individual drains or networks of drains you see in this middle one. Here's from the site at the Webb's property at Scotts Brook. The yield of water in average to above average yields is really important. That's going to top up your water resources and means that you're going to maybe enter these drought phases with more water banked. But they're really not a drought proofing option. So we need to be a little bit careful on the messages that we push out on this. But equally, we've been to field days where people are putting these in and dumping them down the nearest gully and getting rid of this water, which is completely mad. So we need to make sure that people are thinking about this as a potential asset and not just a problem. The next piece of the puzzle was looking at dam covers, and Emily from our teams led a lot of the analysis work on this. This focused on some of these floating covers. These are effectively very large swimming pool covers. This one here is a thermal image down at the site in Gardner. And then the last one was a piece of work that we did in collaboration with Anthony Bodycoat and the team at the Water Corporation. And this is actually Richard George's boot next to the Hexacover, looking at this Hexacover product that was at the Wellstead area. So again, this sort of multi-agency partnership and being able to share knowledge across groups has been a real highlight, in terms of this collaborative approach to doing the R&D work and leveraging, the R&D work that is being done, across different agencies and making that available. So part of the work was looking at that, reduction of evaporative losses, also looking at benchmarking leakage. So, part of the was trying to, reinforce these powerful messages by working specifically with growers and different grower groups, and being able to present some hard numbers around, how much actual water is being lost from systems. And so that benchmarking that we did by building sort of floating weather stations on the dams and monitoring them quite intensively, and lots of sort of tricky analysis by Emily. So we were able to show, those water losses between 2 and 2.5 metres, and high variability in leakage losses. There's also a more recent trial that's underway. There's Renee from Compass out in her kayak dumping some leakage treatments in there. And that's sort of a last piece of the puzzle that we're ticking away at again. Something that was really strongly, pushed out from the grower groups and the kind of a bottom-up approach to what we want to do. The other thing is working through and trying to do some of the work around, just how much water is available. So some of the modelling work, if you've got a dam that's 100% full on the 1st of October, you have no rainfall over summer. When you come to put in your, your pre-emergent program and your spray program associated with your crop, best case scenario is 50% of that water is available. So again, trying to reinforce that water planning message to say, if you have a 5 megalitre dam, you don't have 5 megalitres of water. You've got at best 2.5 megalitres of water. And that's if you manage to have an adequate catchment that got it full before the season. If you enter the end of the winter and you've got a dam that's 25% full, basically you're going to have no water by the end of summer. So it's going back to these messages of reinforcing farm water planning, and something that we've, I guess, not done so much of in the last few years or so. The again, excellent work that Emily's done with the team, looking at the evaporation covers. So the total effectiveness of the evaporation covers is about 70% reduction under the covered proportion. And initially, I guess we expected this to be higher, but it kind of makes sense. You can see the nature of the way that the water sits on top of these, and obviously they're going to heat up. The dam itself is around about 30%, 36% lower this particular site down in Gardner, and somewhere in the order of 25 to 40% of total reduction of evaporation that was achieved in the sites where we did the benchmarking. I guess another key lesson from this one, and again, the work that we did with Anthony and his team on the hexacover, was the difference between manufacturers' figures. So they say that this is 100% effective under the covered area, which is lovely in theory, but doesn't play out. Remember, I think the hexacover people were 99% effective. And I think the magic number was 76% reduction with the hexacover product. So again, it underlines the need to do the R&D work to really show what we're doing here. Again, going back to some of the older stuff that the department had done in the 70s or 80s, 90s through the 2000s, benchmarking evaporative losses from dams. Here's one of our floating pontoon weather stations, which allows us to quite accurately benchmark losses. So in this case, the vegetation around the dam managed to reduce evaporative losses by around about that 30% mark. And so, these are really a key opportunity that there still appears to be huge resistance within the industry. If you put trees near your dam, it'll crack the surface and it'll leak like a sieve. In this case, this is a high quality, high reliable, really high quality water resource that they've got, which is giving them much more available water by the vegetation around it. Another key part, and in particular, was large support from the MADFIG team to do some water quality sampling. Was starting to move into this, more expanded thinking around water quality and fit for purpose water. And so this was trying to go to samples that are being used on property and really looking at them in detail in terms of their performance. And so we've basically broken this up into on-farm bores, the dams, rainwater tanks, and then scheme water that people were using in the farming operations. One of the key things here was, I guess, the limited literacy around water quality and the number of people who are actually actively testing their water. So occasionally you'd come across farmers like, yes, I test my water. When did you last do it? Oh, I tested that resource 3 years ago. We're presuming it's the same. So one of the things that we found is there's some high seasonal variability. It depends on the parameters that you're looking at, and then also trying to pull together, and some great work from the people at the Australian Herbicide Resistance Initiative team at UWA, trying to pull together some of the literature. So, for example, if you happen to be farming in bits of the wheat belt and you've got access to scheme water, but you're right at the range margins of that scheme, and that water has sat around in concrete lined pipes for a long period of time, you may have water that has a high pH, and that's what we found with this. Why is that a problem? Well, if you're doing glyphosate applications and you're potentially using water that might be at the higher end, you need to think really carefully about that water. Now, most of that water is more than adequate, and then depending on which parameters you're looking at, its hardness around bores and dams and so on. So this is an area that's really, I guess, emerged as one that's got huge opportunity to really move and evolve our thinking, rather than just do you have enough water? Do you have the right amount of water? And so this is a really important sort of learning from the project. The last one I wanted to share is we have supported the training of a couple of PhD students, and this is a great piece of work from one of them, Nick Wright, who's also part of the DPIRD team. Not here today because he's on paternity leave, but here's a great piece of work that I think is really, the kind of evolving thing out of this project. So it's using different sorts of satellite imagery. This is actually work from a different PhD student that's been looking at how do we downscale or rescale some of the imagery to look at farm water supplies. But this is work that Nick's pulled together for one of his most recent papers, where he's actually plotting here, this is monthly rainfall in the bar charts in orange, and the cumulative deviation from the mean. So it's kind of showing you, raw behaviour, downward trend, and that makes sense. Yeah, so 18, 19, 20, downward trend in water availability, we know that. 21, 22 were wet, so it shows that really well. What it does show is the dam water area. So he's using satellites to monitor dams, and so we think that this might be a really valuable opportunity to actually provide this near real-time ability to forecast where our non-potable water supplies are looking within regional WA, and being able to be a bit more ahead of the ball, or also benchmarking, how severe, when we had, for example, our drought response task force, how severe and what was the status of water availability at that time relative to other times in the past. So that's just, I guess, some other work flagging from the team. Last piece I wanted to cover before I'll handball over it was around the economics. And so one of the key things has been trying to, to look at, how do we get water? Bonnie has sort of found this nice one from the Water Conservation Handbook in 1971, and this problem, persists onwards. And so, when we need, non-potable water for agricultural purposes, we really want to, explore mechanisms for farmers to be reliant and as much as possible, maybe off the grid, and really looking at the ways that we can get water. So if we look at tarpaulin catchments, yes, the unit cost is slightly higher than a roaded catchment or a natural catchment. But it's also about this quantity of runoff and whether that is a reliable water resource. Because the implications here is that, the natural or paddock water is actually very cheap to get at this point, but when you have to start carting it, the cost to the grower is maybe in the order of $17 to $28 a kilolitre to cart, and that's based on some of the work that was done within the team and by Ross Kingwell. But the cost to the Department of Water or to the Water Corporation to cart around some of that water is maybe more approaching $50 to $65 a kilolitre at those times. And so on-farm reliability and economics and building that into water planning tools is really important. I might just handball across to John from our team. Yep, okay. Right, okay. So the last piece of the puzzle, I guess, was putting together what we call the water evaluation platform, and we've just got a little bit of a video introducing that. Hopefully. I've got no clue if I'm on time, overtime, or whatever.
Your session was due to finish at 5 minutes past 10, so
That's a part, maybe.
Otherwise, you've got a Daniel to answer to.
Yeah.
Water security is a growing challenge for southwest Western Australia. Unpredictable weather, fluctuating water supplies and increasing demands make managing water resources more and more difficult. The Water Evaluation Platform, or WEP, helps rural water users make smart, long-term decisions about dam and catchment planning. The platform is built on research and economic analysis, carried out by the WaterSmart Dams team, and its value is enhanced by the practical insights shared by our grower site hosts, who have implemented real on-farm solutions such as roaded and tarp catchments or child floating covers as part of their everyday operations. Developed through years of research in collaboration with Western Australian farmers, government agencies and agriculture experts, the platform simulates how individual dams perform under different demands, construction and catchment scenarios using observed weather data. The Water Evaluation Platform allows users to create a personal login and profile where users can save details about their own operation's unique water requirements. This allows users to customize catchment runoff calculations and costs. When saved, scenarios and simulations can be easily revisited at any time. With a tailored wet profile to users' own water demand, users can explore a range of options to identify the most effective system to meet their needs. The Water Evaluation Platform includes an evaporation reduction analysis tool, helping users assess how much dam covers can reduce evaporation and improve water retention, ensuring the water stays where it's needed most. The Water Evaluation Platform can help users evaluate non-potable water planning options with confidence. Whether building a new dam or improving an existing one, this easy-to-use platform provides personalised support to guide real-world decisions for individual water security needs. For more information, visit the website.
Hi everyone. Just like to reiterate what Nick said and just thank you all for the opportunity to speak today, and apologise to Gavin, who will now hear this speech for the second time in 2 weeks. So I'm going to very quickly add a few more details about the water evaluation platform that you've just seen in that video. So the platform's designed to complement the work that Nick's been talking about, where you've got site-specific monitoring of dam and catchment technologies that are actually there in the ground. And it's designed to give you a platform by which you can simulate a much broader range of dam and catchment scenarios across different geographies, different water demands, different budget contexts. So the app gives you sort of suite of dam and catchment analytic tools. So you can do things like simulate the long run performance of a dam and catchment that you specify and see how reliable it is in terms of meeting your demand. You can do optimization, so look at figuring out what's the right size dam to build, what's the differences in performance of different types of catchments in terms of their ability to generate runoff. And then it's got some cost benefit analysis tools. So what would be the return on investment of me fixing a leaky dam or putting evaporation covers on a dam? So behind all of those analysis tools is a daily water balance model. It takes a sort of representation of the size and the shape of your dam, and then uses daily metadata to fill up the dam when it rains and to take water out of the dam each day through evaporation. And then coupled to that sort of daily water balance model that represents the water that's in the dam each day, we've got a catchment model That lets you sort of describe the characteristics and the properties of the catchment. And then when that catchment gets rained on, it generates an amount of runoff that drains into the dam and then fills it up. And you're also able to specify other water sources. So if your dam is just one part of your non-potable water resource mix, so you might have a bore supply, you can also account for that in the tool as well and sort of model the range of options that make up your non-potable water resources. And then finally, you can specify the demand that you place on your dam. So if you've got livestock drinking from the dam, you can specify what your livestock flock looks like, and then the tool will calculate a daily drinking rate and take that water out of the dam. You can also specify what your spray program would look like, and that water is removed from the dam at appropriate times. And then if you've got other outflows, like you've got irrigation demands, say for your town oval, if you're using it for a town dam, then you can specify that as well. So to get access to those modelling tools, you'd head to the Water Valuation Platform.app website, and I was going to very quickly run through sort of what a workflow using the platform would look like. So the first thing you do is you'd go into the app, and then you'd create profiles for your water demand. So what are you actually using that dam for? What livestock are drinking from it? What irrigation scheduling do you have? You specify what catchments you've got that drain into that dam. And then you'd also put in some cost profiles. So what would be the cost that you'd incur if you were going to build or maintain that dam and catchment scenario? Once you've got all that configured, you'd go and select an analysis mode. So currently you've got options to do like a long run simulation of dam and catchment performance. You can do sort of design and optimization mode. So what's the right size dam that I need to build to provide water for my demands in my particular geography and location? Or what's the right catchment that I should build to generate a reliable water supply to fill up the dam? And then you can also select cost benefit analysis tools looking at fixing leaky dams or putting evaporation covers on a dam. Once you've picked your analysis modes, you head into this web form interface where you actually configure the specifics of a simulation. So all of the analysis modes have a very similar user interface to set them off. You have a sidebar on the side where you'd go in and add in details that are specific to the dam and catchment that you're modeling. So what's the shape of the dam? What date range do I want to simulate for? What catchments do I want to attach to drain into the dam? That sort of thing. And then you've also got a map that you can use to locate your dam on the landscape. And if you need to, you can go and draw on catchments and that sort of thing. Once that's all sort of configured, you'd run the simulation and you'd get your results back in an interactive dashboard. So typically, you'd get the headline results in a report card that will give you sort of the main findings. And then if you're interested, you can bring up a more detailed dashboard with a suite of interactive charts, interactive tables, and lots more information about the analysis that was run to generate your sort of headline results. And then all of that analysis will be saved back to your account, so you can sort of view these analyses at later dates as well. So that's pretty much the workflow that you'd use to use the water valuation platform. Each of those different analysis tools has a very similar kind of method of using it. You'd follow that same flow. It's available now, so we're really keen for people to use it, keen for people to give us feedback, to tell us which features are useful, what features are missing that would be really helpful. You can access it on that link, and I'm more than happy to sit down with people and provide tutorials, workshops, and help people get up and running too. So that's the water evaluation platform in a nutshell. And I think I'm going to hand back to Nick to wrap up.
So yeah, I guess the last bit that we wanted to share, and big thanks to Bonnie for everything that she does in keeping this project actually running, rather than me that just swans in and pretends I know what's going on. I guess we wanted to pull together some of the key learnings and you know, sort of share some of that out of the project. So I guess for us and our particular group, this project really represented a bit of a jump in the way that we go about doing science in terms of the model, and this sort of on-farm and at scale of demonstration model, or the on-farm experimentation model. And so I think there's some really great strengths that we've found from this, you know, the partnership with the Grower Group Alliance and through into the individual grower groups, being able to support some of the people and, you know, a couple of days a week within the grower groups to work on the project, I think has been really critical to its success. That's allowed us, you know, access to really, switched on, innovative growers who are well respected within their communities. And that, site host relationship is really, those people aren't here today because they're madly running around doing, all of the other important things like running their farm business. But, their ability and willingness to support the sites, to be able to, sit there on a field day and talk about things, to show them at the scale that they've worked, I think is really powerful. It's really, I think, showed a particularly, much more compelling pathway to adoption. And I think it's also the model, I guess, support through the Future Drought Fund. And we've sort of very deliberately taken the perspective, and thinking about the sort of economic models of where we should be playing is, our sense is that we should be taking on the higher risk or more uncertain things. I certainly, have this philosophy where I'm happy to, do things and fail and learn from failing. But also that, we should be taking on the liability and the funding to support these trials of more uncertain solutions. So I think they've maybe been real key strengths. Sometimes some of these components aren't necessarily supported. I think within the R&D community, sometimes we, have really missed that opportunity to do that much more, grassroots embedded sort of work. In terms of some of the challenges, I guess, when you do on-farm and grower-led science, sometimes you get grower-led science. So you get them interested in things they know. They're interested in things that they're influenced by their region and by what's commercially available. So the ability to test blue sky and more out-of-the-box things is at times more limited. And there's this need to kind of collaboratively work together to, I guess, also inform the what you don't know bits of on-farm experimentation. And so, really being clear and understanding that top-down versus bottom-up, models and trying to meet in the middle. I think that's been real key learning from this project. And I think we've got it broadly good, not perfect. You never get it right, 100% right. But I think we've learned a lot from that. And I think, our group is really bought in and keen to keep working, with the Grower Group Alliance with this model. We think it's what we need to do as an R&D community to actually translate research into impact, and we're being pushed more and more by the university to do that, and that is a good thing. Some challenges around us using more scientific grade systems. We probably underappreciated the interest from the growers to access the data, and we probably had systems that were very good at very precisely measuring things and pretty terrible at having really nice user-friendly interfaces. And so that was maybe a bit of a challenge that we maybe hadn't appreciated as much as possible, and something that we'd maybe need to consider. But also that's kind of an inherent trade-off about whether you use really nicely resolved systems or more kind of scientific grade approaches. Where we see the sort of key gaps and future opportunities, and this is maybe foreshadowing things that we might pick up later in the day, that piece around water quality and fit for purpose water, particularly around herbicide efficacy, we think is a very compelling piece. We have tried to fund it through some other mechanisms. We're continuing to think about what that looks like. But for growers who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on their herbicide program, where we've got direct examples, talking to an agronomist who'd gone out to deal with a herbicide resistance problem up near Karoo a couple of weeks ago. A particular farmer had this, herbicide resistance problem, and then was trying to work out when he'd changed his water resource why the herbicide resistance problem had gone away. And so he didn't have a herbicide resistance problem, he had a rubbish water quality problem. And so that water quality component driving herbicide resistance in particular for our grain croppers is a really, really critical piece of the puzzle. And we think that is a need to do it. The other thing I think was influenced, for me, a paddock conversation with a very large sheep farmer around Darkan, and obviously the whole, debate around this and the trajectory of this is playing out with the election this weekend. But his comment in a post, no live sheep export world for him, his way forward is high quality livestock production. And for high quality livestock production, he needs large quantities of very reliable and high quality water to drive, premium sheep production. And so we need to make sure that industry is equipped with those tools. We foreshadowed some of those satellite remote sensing tools, and we're really keen to look at if there's opportunities to evolve those, and can we get better at regional drought forecasting and being more responsive? Can we better understand the areas within the state that are really water acute and short? Can we overlay that with the scheme and then understand how these different pieces of the puzzle move and work? Can we better inform where we are doing, drought declarations or responses to dry seasons? And so we think that that might be a really interesting tool to add into the mix there. There's this huge variation in technical knowledge, and there's been this massive pullout, and that's been, we've seen that play out in multiple government agencies. But, DPIRD is not a training and research extension organisation like it was 30 or 40 years ago or 20 years ago. We, unfortunately found out yesterday that a grant that we'd put in, but we're playing with some other interesting ideas. So John in particular had led an application that we'd put in to use a generative AI model. So in this case, the Llama model that is Meta's model, we called it Llama Farmer. We thought it was guaranteed to get up. It's a great name. And so Llama is the generative AI model. But what we've got, for example, and if any of you have played with AI, and it's probably against all sorts of copyright issues, but I went and got old soil land conservation, manuals from DPIRD from the 70s or 80s, and I've fed them into these generative AI models. Then you ask it to produce technical summaries for you. It does an amazing job of summarising this content. So the ability to go through, John Simon's ridiculous archive of everything that's, been published in soil land conservation in the last 400 years and digitise that and push it into a containerised AI may be a really interesting way forward about how we change and evolve how we do technical knowledge sharing and how we deal with that obstacle that we've got out in industry. Because clearly, DPIRD is not going to get funded to run, how to calculate, runoff in catchments and build roaded catchments. Well, I don't know, maybe they are, but probably not. So yeah, we've got to change our thinking, and we've got to push the knowledge that we know that's there out into industry and make it accessible. And so that might be some answers. The other thing we're very aware of, and push back into some of the things that we did within the project, and we're very aware of this, is that a lot of technologies and things that we use were very plastic intensive. And so the whole life cycle of plastics and plastics in the system that we have maybe advocated for, there are problems and issues with that we need to be very aware of. So particularly with high performance catchments, are there options that aren't HDPE or PVC? We went back to some great stuff that Tim Pope had done 20 odd years ago, and different sorts of surface treatments and work that DPIRD had led back in the day. But we need to be aware of those and better understand that space and look for those new technologies and things like that. Thank you very much.